It's Glasgow's second largest park, and it has the perfect pub-to-pub walk for a Sunday afternoon. But how was this park a hotbed of industry, war and entertainment for over 1,000 years? Find out now on this episode of Astonishing Glasgow. I'm starting this episode in Cathcart. I'm on Old Castle Road, which is a clue to what's coming up, but I'm also starting and finishing my walk at the Old Smiddy pub. This is only a 5-minute walk away from Cathcart railway station, and there is plenty of parking on the streets around about, so if you want to visit and do the walk for yourself, I strongly encourage you do. It's very hard to get lost. I will give directions as I go, but if you do come, expect mud, expect stairs and expect hills. Just remember, there's a really nice warm pub at the end of the walk that serves hot food and cold beer. And no, they haven't paid me for this advert. I'm going to start walking down Snuff Mill Road. That's another little clue as to what's at the end of the street. But long before we get there, you may, if you remember obscure old TV shows, remember this street from a comedy show. When I say comedy, it's a little bit of a loose bracket, because this is where Norman Lovett, who played Holly in Red Dwarf, this is where his character lived when he played the title character in the TV show I Love It in 1990.
Good morning.
I'm not really surprised you don't remember it. It wasn't that good.
Meow.
Now at the end of the row stands Lindsay House. This was built in 1863 for David Lindsay, the owner of the mill that stood below it, but we'll get to that. David Lindsay was granted permission to build this tenement by the then Earl of Cathcart, who slightly choked on his cornflakes when he realised the size of the building he'd agreed to. The date stone at the top of the building shows 1863, along with Lindsay's crest. A better example of the crest is above the side door, and if you look closely, you'll see that it is every letter of his surname intertwined. Directly opposite the tenement, thought to be one of the oldest in Glasgow, is another block of houses, but that's not how this building started its life. This was Lindsay's mill, known as the Snuff Mill, though it really only produced snuff for a very short time. It is strange that the name Snuff Mill has lasted when this was Cathcart Mill. Originally built in the 18th century, it was converted in 1812 to produce paper and card products. A very small part of the mill produced snuff from 1814. When the tobacco boom was over, the mill was back to being a paper mill. That was until it closed and was sold in 1905 to a Mr. Mackintosh. He built the newer house, known as Mill House, on the site of the mill cottage, and the mill building fell into disrepair. When I was growing up, I would pass here a lot. It was the 1980s, and by that time the house was lying empty and open. It had no windows and the mill had no roof, meaning you could look down on the internal structure and some of the old cogs and shafts. In the late 80s and early 90s, the house was renovated and the mill buildings were converted into 5 apartments, though a serious flood during the work delayed conversion and necessitated the tall concrete flood wall to be built. From here I had planned to enter the park from the gates at the end of Snuff Mill Road, but currently these are padlocked shut. It's due to the path being unsafe, and it does not look like there will be money available anytime soon to make it safe to walk along. So plan B, I'm going to cross the bridge and enter the park on the other side of the river. It's not exactly a hardship doing the route this way round, and as I cross the bridge, I'm actually following in the footsteps of Rabbie Burns, as this was, in the 1700s, the main road between Ayr and Glasgow. So the bridge is obviously old, but how old? Well, if you look over the right side of the bridge, where it faces Lindsay House, there is a date stone showing 1624. That would make this bridge exactly 400 years old when I'm making this video in 2024. But it's not that easy. It is thought this date stone was reused from the earlier bridge, and that this bridge was constructed closer to 1724, so it's only 300 years old, practically brand new. The current bridge could be the third bridge that has stood here, but even before the first bridge, there was a crossing here through a shallow ford in the river. So happy birthday to the bridge, which may be 400 years old, 300 years old, or a lot older. Either way, it's time for us to explore the Linn Park. I grew up in Cathcart. I walked over this bridge to get to nursery school and secondary school. I came to the park for family walks, sledging, den building, baggy minnow fishing, bike rides and all sorts of other mischief, so I know the park like the back of my hand, and hopefully after seeing this video you will come and explore it for yourself. History wise, the park is a lot newer than you might think. Glasgow Corporation began buying the lands in 1919, and the last pocket of land the council bought was opened as a public park in 1927. Before it was a park, the land was owned by the Gordons of Aikenhead, who sold it to the city. But there is a long history of families who owned the land that made up the park. The Semples of Cathcart, the Maxwells of Williamwood, the McDowells and the Sugar Campbells all owned parts of the park. Remember these names as they will pop up later as we pass some of their legacies. But before we go any further, and as I try not break an ankle on these stairs, this is one of the man-made features of the river that is just about surviving. This is the weir that created the reservoir of water that fed the Leat running into the Snuff Mill that we passed earlier. When I was at school in the 90s, this structure was at least twice the length it is now. I wonder how long the rest of it will last before it fully washes away. The weir would have meant that the water level at this part of the river would have been far higher than it is now, and this is not the last place we will see the river being harnessed for its power as we walk. The river now flows and falls through the park, but around 200 years ago it would have been just a series of calm bodies of water, all behind dams and all harnessed for power for the mills. Now it's a really nice autumn day, and even if I wasn't making this video, I would happily walk around this park for hours, and I don't think I'm the only one enjoying the park right now. Right, enough of that. I think you've heard that joke a few times already. So, as I continue through the leaves, I'm nearing the next industrial site in the park, but always keep an eye out for unusual wildlife. This is Millholm Road, and these big gates, they block access to the site of Millholm Paper Mill. The Hamiltons of Aikenhead sold the land to James Hall in 1768. By the 1840s, the land was owned by Robert and James Cooper, who had redesigned the mill to make better use of the land for paper production. Things were going well for the Coopers, and James was able to commission Alexander Greek Thompson to design and build Holmwood House for him in 1857. This is now a National Trust for Scotland site, another thing that's well worth a visit. Robert Cooper donated £8,000 to build the Cooper Institute nearby on Clarkston Road, and the Cooper family grave is in the Old Cathcart Parish graveyard, as seen in episode 42 of Astonishing Glasgow. I would have liked to have taken you onto the site to explore what was left, but that's quite a fence, and I'm not up for climbing it, so you'll need to make do with some pictures that I took around 10 years ago before the fence went up. I do wish I'd taken video. Hindsight is 2020. The mill building can be seen in this picture, but trust me when I say none of it is left. Some mill features still exist, which we can go and visit, but not until we've dealt with steps. Tragedy! If we get to the top of these stairs, on the right hand side is James Cooper's Holmwood House. Now, no sooner have we come up those steps than we need to go quite a long way back down the steps and down quite a slippery hill, so if you come here, be very careful. As a kid, I used to look down the hill with a mixture of confusion and wonderment, and it was all because of this. A ladder? I could see that it was a boat dock, and I could see that it was deep enough to need a ladder, but the river is a good 50 metres away. The water level on this part of the river was much deeper at the start of the 20th century, and it was because of what's through these trees. This is what's left of the weir that provided the head of water to power the mill. Now, when this dam was complete, the river behind would be quite a lot deeper and would have been a calm, large pool of water. Don't follow my lead here. I am a highly trained Egypt, and walking out on an unstable structure is not to be advised. I do easily remember a time when the top of this dam was continuous from bank to bank, but a flood in 1990-1991 finally broke the top off the dam and started washing the bank away. Now, this whole section of river would have been completely different to how it is now, and the little boat dock, that would have been full of water, and not just full of this fool who needs to try and climb back up the hill. As we walk further into the park, you might start to think that paper mills were the only form of industry on the land. Before the mills, however, the land was a rich source of limestone and coal. In the 1810s, adverts appeared offering the chance to work the land for its minerals, and the most valuable of those was the limestone. Limestone was so abundant that the seams could be chased back into the hillside from openings like this one. I am not going to tell you where this is. It's in a fenced off section that only a highly trained Egypt is allowed to climb over and go and find. Shafts and mines were also dug down from the surface to follow the seam, and when I was growing up, this area had a depression in the ground surrounded by rocks. I was told by a family friend that it was a well for the castle, which always slightly confused me as there's a river running right past the castle. Why would you walk here to get fresh water? Now I've realised that it was more likely the site of a mine shaft, and if you look on the maps of the National Library of Scotland, you see that a number of shafts existed in this area. Now, it wasn't just limestone they were looking for. Below the limestone seams was an abundant quantity of coal, but mining of this was restricted. Miners would only bring up the coal needed for burning the lime, as once burnt, the lime could be used in concrete, cement coatings, and as a fertiliser for farming. And by the mid-1700s, there was around 6,000 carts of processed lime leaving Cathcart every year. It was a major industry in this area. Now, we're not far now from some of the natural features of the park. I'm a particular fan of this bend in the river. I have stopped here a lot in the past 20 years and taken some pics that I'm, well, relatively proud of. And this is the Linn Park beach. No golden sands of the Med, but you can't skim stones on a sandy beach. The Linn Park gets its name from the Linn, or waterfall that cascaded into the River Cart inside the park. Now it's not this one. The Linn Falls are just a little bit further upstream, and you can probably hear them in the background of this shot if you listen carefully. So here they are, the reason for all that noise, and the reason that the park is called the Linn Park. First, the name, the Linn Park. A linn, as a noun, has two meanings. One meaning of linn in Old English is the torrent or waterfall, and in Scots Gaelic it means the pool, both evident around our waterfall. But why did it almost spell the end for the park? The clue is over on the right of the pool, where there's this small opening at the base of the cliff. This was an outlet of a water turbine, and to see why it's here, we need to go to the top of the waterfall. All that marks the area now are 3 low walls, but this was the location of the estate sawmill, which was powered by a water turbine and fed from the top of the waterfall. But this was tiny in comparison to the plans of James Monteith, a textile worker who took the lease of the Linn Falls in 1793. He had ambitions to build a major cotton mill on the land which would have rivalled the size of the mill at New Lanark. Had these plans come to fruition and the mill had been developed, it's very unlikely I would be standing here now. This whole area would have been mill buildings and housing, and probably a small town, so it looks like the park had a very narrow escape. Talking of narrow escapes, it's nothing in comparison to the narrow escape the next feature had in April 1941. On the evening in question, there was a Luftwaffe raid above Glasgow. In 3 hours, bombs had fallen all over the city, and one of those bombs landed right here and exploded, leaving this massive crater behind. The force of the explosion must have been huge, but at least all it did was leave a hole in the ground and flatten some trees. Had it been a few metres closer to the river, it may well have destroyed the little white bridge. I've always known it as the White Bridge, even when it stopped being quite so white, but it is also known as the Iron Bridge and the Halfpenny Bridge. I sometimes wonder how I've made it to my 40s, because I used to swim here and monkey bar over the river from the bottom of the bridge. It is now Glasgow's oldest iron bridge, and when it was built in the 1830s, it was a replacement to a shallow ford further up the stream. The location of that ford is marked by this structure on the riverbank. It's nothing more exciting than the end of a pipe bridge that carried a water main over the river. You can see the pipe on this side, as well as the matching end and the parts of the support on the other side of the bridge. But I digress. Walking to the top of the hill and overlooking the little bridge is the site of Linn House. The first house was built in 1811 for the Reverend James Hall, but he was declared bankrupt a very short time later. With the bridge built, new residents were attracted and the old mansion house was replaced by the current Linn House in 1840. Those new residents were known as the Sugar Campbells. No relation. The Sugar Campbells made their fortune in sugar. Sadly, this also means that slavery provided their fortune, paid for the White Bridge and paid for the mansion. Ironic then that it is called the White Bridge when it was kind of paid for by black slaves. But when the park opened to the public in 1921, the house became a tea room, lodge and an education centre. This is how I remember the house when I was a kid. There was a park ranger station, a small museum, and out front, occasionally, if you were lucky, there were tractor rides. By the late 1980s though, the house was empty, boarded up and close to collapse. A developer bought the structure for £1 and converted it into these private flats that you see now. At the back of the house is the stables which survive to this day, though I think they are now privately operated. One feature of the park that I wish had survived is the zoo. Can you remember when this was the zoo in the park? Now, when I say zoo, don't expect polar bears and lions. It was more peacocks and guinea pigs. But as a 5-year-old, it was the best place in the world. I clearly remember there being white dovecots and poles, peacocks wandering about, and animal pens at the back of the site. You can still see the foundation of the pens, but there is only one pen here now, and I don't think anything has lived there for a long time. It's actually got a bit of a horror movie vibe to it, hidden amongst the trees here, so I'm not really going to hang about. Now, I thought I knew the park really well and had an idea where everything was, and then a few years ago I saw this picture captioned "The Linn Park Bandstand." I originally thought that it might have been in this area, but none of the hills lined up, so I quickly realised it couldn't have been here, and I went in search of its location. With a bit more research, I came across some aerial photographs of the park, and wouldn't you know it, there's a bandstand right there. It becomes even clearer if I overlay the map from the National Library of Scotland site, and you can see the bandstand right there, clearly marked. This is the field next to the old zoo, and now has a zigzag path up to the top wood. A little walk up the path, and looking the other way, this is how the bandstand would have looked, but there's absolutely no trace that it ever existed. Time's getting on, and my batteries are starting to run out of juice. The camera batteries are also starting to get a bit flat, so a few more highlights of the park before we finish back at the pub where we started. As you walk towards the exit, keep left.
Please listen. To get out, you must take the left tunnel.
Thank you.
This will take you towards the Snuff Mill exit rather than the Croft Foot exit. Now you won't see it, but deep in the valley is the mill home site I visited earlier. You can definitely hear the river as it rushes through the dam though. Keep left again until you eventually hit the dead end. This is the other end of the closed path from Snuff Mill Bridge. It's all because the high cliff above us has become unstable, so the path has been closed for safety. Looking the other way, this was the best sledging hill in the park, but with a slightly strange feature. This crater is not a bomb site like the one near the White Bridge. This was the site of Cathcart House, which was built around 1740 by the Semple family, who up until then lived in Cathcart Castle. It passed back into the ownership of the Earl of Cathcart around 1801, but when the land was bought by the council, along with the castle, the house was demolished in 1927, leaving only the crater. The castle did manage to survive a little bit longer, although it too has now been demolished. I do mention more about the castle's history in episode 60 of Astonishing Glasgow, as it has links to Mary Queen of Scots. Possibly. But as the site of the castle is also fenced off, because the cliff edge is unstable, I'll need to show you footage from before the fence went up as we continue out of the gate, over the road and turn left. The castle was a far bigger structure until August 1980, when it was unceremoniously demolished after standing here for over 500 years. The walls had become unstable after a storm, and any chance to save the building had passed years before, as the walls were completely saturated. The castle was hauled away in tipper trucks and dumped into the Queen's Dock on the Clyde. the site that would become the new Scottish Exhibition Centre. So with that high fence now in place, the closest view you're going to get of what remains of the castle now is from the opposite side of Old Castle Road at Courtnow. And while you're there, look the other way and you'll see the supposed location of Mary Queen of Scots' camp during the Battle of Langside. But if you do watch episode 60 of Astonishing Glasgow, after this one, you will know why that is very unlikely. Now that we're back on Old Castle Road, the Old Smiddy pub where we started our walk is at the bottom of the hill. If you want to know more about Linn Park and its history, you definitely need to check out the fantastic Friends of Linn Park website. I'll put a link in the video description below. Now if you have sat and watched this video on the toilet, your legs will be asleep, and if you've been affected by any of the issues covered in this video, do call out for a loved one to help you stand up. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to hit that like and subscribe button. It helps a lot. If you want to make a small donation to help me make more astonishing episodes, then please hit that super thanks button and give what you can. It's all very much appreciated, and these are the superstars who donated after the last episode. Alternatively, if you want to grab some Astonishing Glasgow merchandise, head over to the Spreadshirt page. All the links are in the description below. I have added hats, umbrellas, hoodies and sweatshirts just in time for autumn. If you want to get in touch, leave a comment or head over to my Facebook and Instagram pages and let me know your memories of Linn Park. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time in Astonishing Glasgow. Right, I'm going to head into that pub for gammon, egg and chips. Ho ho! See you later.